Good afternoon and welcome to today's program, Careers in International Anti-Corruption Law. My name is Jessica Tillipman and I am the Assistant Dean for Government Procurement Law Studies and a professor of the Anti-Corruption and Compliance courses at the George Washington University Law School in Washington, D.C. I am also a co-chair of the ABA International Anti-Corruption Committee. I am delighted to serve as a co-moderator for today's program, which is co-hosted by the ABA International Anti-Corruption Committee, GW Law, and American University Washington College of Law. This program was designed to provide information to law students and junior attorneys about the field of international anti-corruption law, to introduce you to an array of opportunities in this field, and to answer any questions you may have about how to pursue your career or internships in this area. I will remind you again about this at the end of the program, but for students interested in international anti-corruption issues, including career opportunities, I encourage you to join the ABA committee, the International Anti-Corruption Committee. It's free to join the ABA as an existing student. And momentarily after our speakers get started, I will post links in the chat function so you can learn more about how to join the ABA if you are not already a member. Today, I have the distinct honor of introducing an incredibly impressive group of international anti-corruption experts. First, my co-moderator, Nancy Boswell, is the, and I lost it right now. I'm so sorry about that. Nancy Boswell is an adjunct professor and director of the U.S. and International Anti-Corruption Law Certificate and CLE program at American University Washington College of Law. She is also the former head of Transparency International's U.S. chapter. Now I'd like to introduce our panelists. Cheryl Scarborough is a partner at the law firm of Simpson, Thacher, and a former chief of the SEC's FCPA unit. Rob Leventhal is the division chief of global policy and programs at the U.S. State Department, Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement. Adam Kaplan is the Deputy General Counsel of Investigations at the USAID's Office of Inspector General. Heather Lowe is counsel at the Pew Charitable Trust. Jonathan Rush is a principal at DTG Risk and Compliance and also a former senior vice president, head of anti-bribery and corruption governance at Wells Fargo. So as we are speaking, so thank you to our panelists. And as we are speaking, please go ahead and ask questions in the chat function or the Q&A area of Zoom. We're going to reserve time at the end to answer your questions live. So I'm going to go ahead and get the ball rolling. Please introduce yourself and provide a brief description of your job and favorite aspects of it. So let's go ahead and kick off. I said her name first. Cheryl, if you could start off and answer that question, please.
Sure. I'm Cheryl Scarborough, and as Jessica mentioned, I'm at Simpson Thacher, and my focus there is primarily FCPA related work. I started doing this when I was at the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was in the Division of Enforcement there for almost 20 years, doing a wide range of matters of all kinds, but then toward the end of my tenure, focusing a lot more on investigating FCPA matters, and segued from there to becoming the chief of the FCPA unit at the SEC, coordinating efforts with the Department of Justice and other regulators around the world. And then left about 10 years ago to join Simpson Thacher, conduct internal investigations and represent companies and individuals in anti-corruption related investigations by the SEC, DOJ, and other regulators.
Great. I'm going to go in order now of my Zoom screen. So I'm going to go with Heather next.
All right, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here and to speak to everybody. My name is Heather Lowe, and I'm counsel at the Pew Charitable Trusts, which is an internationally operating 501c3 charitable or research organization. We have offices in Washington and Philadelphia, Portland, London, and Brussels, but we have staff located in various parts of the US and really all over the world. We also provide grants to organizations that we collaborate with all over the world. And we and our grantees are interacting with government officials, again, all over the world. That worldwide presence means that we need to really understand the whole corruption risk and how to guard against that at the organization. Pew works on issues where we feel that there's not enough solid data to help the public and decision makers make informed policy decisions. And those are often in areas of environmental conservation, consumer and public finance, and civil justice. So being in-house counsel at nonprofits like Pew and Global Financial Integrity, where I worked previously, have a lot of different responsibilities. And as I said, part of that is to guard against corrupt activities in a variety of ways. For example, we really ensure that our contracts have strong anti-corruption language and that our contract partners understand their responsibilities under those agreements. You know, the type of provisions we're talking about are procurement and whether an entity is owned or controlled by a government official, lobbying restrictions, sanctions provisions, restrictions on payments to government officials. You know, it really runs the gamut. We also have to ensure that our staff know and are complying with foreign and US federal and state lobbying regulations and all the gifts and ethics rules that exist all over the world, each different in every different country. We carry out sanctions checks where that's appropriate. We help our staff navigate potential corruption situations when they arise. We run compliance hotlines to make sure that there's always a place that they can go to say, hey, what do we do about this? My favorite aspect of this job really is the variety. When I started as a lawyer, I was an international finance attorney, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. But it was really the same thing over and over every day. As in-house counsel, every day is different.
Thanks so much, Heather.
Sure.
Adam, if you want to go ahead and please introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Good, great. My name is Adam Kaplan. I'm the Deputy General Counsel to the Inspector General at USAID, United States Agency for International Development. So I'll take about 30 seconds just to talk about what an OIG is, what an Inspector General is, because I think we were talking before, you probably heard a lot about it in the news in the past few years, the IG concept. So basically, almost every federal agency has an Inspector General, and the role is designed by Congress really as an independent part of the executive branch. And meaning that the IG's office is responsible for conducting oversight of its establishment agency. So my email, for example, it ends at usaid.gov, just like folks on what we call the agency side, but my boss is presidentially appointed and can only be removed by the president. So the reason is so that she or he, across IGs, have the ability to audit what they want and investigate what they want without interference from the agency, who may not quite appreciate what we're looking into, but we're also there to just sort of help inform their decision making and talk about what's the best and most efficient use of taxpayer funds. But I'm going to talk mostly about the investigation side because that's primarily what I do here at USAID. And we have about 40 criminal investigators who are located in 11 different locations worldwide. And our responsibility is to investigate allegations into fraud and corruption and other forms of misconduct within USAID programming. And most of that is abroad. Sometimes you can have an employee integrity case back in DC, but primarily the investigations are of allegations abroad. So USAID calls its procurement partners or grant partners implementers. So we're out there seeing whether some cases that we get are whether implementers, U.S. foreign aid was diverted to a terrorist organization or a sanctioned group, whether humanitarian aid was lost or otherwise diverted to the black market, whether NGOs are responsibly choosing which vendors they want to use in very complex environments. Like we've had lots of public investigations into the delivery of aid into Syria from Turkey. And what are the responsibilities? What is the liability? What are the risks associated with that for prime implementers, prime contractors to choose which vendors it's using so that it doesn't end up passing along costs of $18 for a $1 shirt to a displaced person. So we're really out there making sure that the taxpayer gets the aid is delivered where it's supposed to go for a reasonable price, and to really root out corruption. If something does go wrong, one of my favorite parts of the job is the outreach we do. And we have frequent, I think I spoke 25 times last year to different NGO legal forums and talking about, look, here are our expectations for self-disclosure, self-reporting. So there's bad things that go on in the world. We don't expect anyone to be perfect, but when you conceal information or hide the ball, that sort of brings us into the picture, piques our curiosity, and could potentially open up an investigation. We consider all criminal, civil, administrative enforcement remedies, and as part of my job is to help our agents and help liaise and work with the Department of Justice, or even in some cases other law enforcement, and seeing really what is potentially available to address particular misconduct.
Adam, it's a reminder I'm gonna have to circle back with you to talk to my class about mandatory disclosure.
That's huge, yes.
Thank you. Let's now turn it to Jonathan. If you could please introduce yourself to the group.
Sure, happy to do so. Well, first of all, what I do at present is a combination of things. In addition to what Heather already mentioned, I have my own corporate compliance consulting practice stemming from the work that I did both at the Justice Department for a long time as a prosecutor, and then at Wells Fargo. I'm also an adjunct professor at American University, Washington College of Law. I work with Professor Boswell with regard to the anti-corruption law program there. And momentarily, I will post a link to the information for our summer program. As to other things that I do currently, I also do corporate training that deals with corporate compliance to a variety of audiences. And a lot of that, all of those different areas of current activity stem from the work that I did for the better part of 4 years, as Jessica mentioned, with Wells Fargo as head of their global anti-bribery and corruption program. I had the good fortune of basically being able to build that program from the ground up, which gives you a better sense of all of the ins and outs of what it's like to be an in-house person trying to oversee and run an effective corporate program. But even before that, I'd spent a total of 26 years as a federal prosecutor with the fraud section of the criminal division at the Justice Department, where I prosecuted public corruption cases against some then well-known people, and also had some role, at least, in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act work of the fraud section, which is the lead for the Department of Justice on all things FCPA. So in terms of how I got to where I am, there was no clear and steady path that led me from one thing to another to another. I spent a long time as a prosecutor because I really enjoyed going to court, putting together complex cases, handling cases against top flight defense attorneys. But I also had the good fortune to be able to do a lot of initiatives for the Justice Department that required me to do a lot of coordination, both nationally with law enforcement agencies across the country, and also internationally on a lot of financial crimes areas. And in some ways, though it's not a typical path to getting into international anti-corruption law, I think it gave me the opportunity to develop a variety of skill sets going well beyond just knowing what litigation is like or how you indict cases or try cases, in terms of how you build coalitions of people, how you bring together people from different areas of interest and specialty. And certainly when you talk about international anti-corruption law and compliance programs, that becomes a significant skill set to be able to build coalitions of people across, especially a large and diversified corporate enterprise, to get them moving in a direction that maybe they hadn't planned to go originally or hadn't thought of as something that would be salient or important to their work, to their day-to-day duties. So all of those things, I think, combine to get me where I am today. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, we have Rob Leventhal. Rob, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Let's leave it to the participants, the viewers, to judge whether it's last and least or last but not least. It's really an honor to be alongside the other panelists, and thank you so much for the organizers and of course the distinguished moderators. So again, I'm Rob Leventhal. I'm a civil servant at the State Department. I've been there about 13 years after doing a few other things that led up to that we can talk about later. And what I do now is I serve as a manager in a bureau of the State Department. The bureau is organized into, the State Department is organized into bureaus with regional focuses and then bureaus with, as we say, functional focuses, thematic or substantive focuses. So I'm a manager within the Bureau for International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs, sometimes affectionately known as drugs and thugs. Feel free to use that term when you're talking to State Department folks, and it'll give you a little air of being on the inside. The INL, as you can imagine, deals with the foreign policy aspects, the international relation aspects of addressing crime internationally and protecting the US from the impact of crime, whether it's narcotics, the traditional mission, or issues that have arisen over the years as priorities for the US, including anti-corruption. So as a manager in that bureau, what I do is I oversee the development and implementation of foreign assistance capacity building programs around the world. The office I'm in focuses on global issues and global programs, among them anti-corruption. So I oversee programs, approximately $130 million a year in new programming each year. And then of course, we're managing last year's programs that continue to be implemented. It's about $250 million a year probably in programs overseen in 8 areas, including anti-corruption, but also money laundering, cybercrime, wildlife trafficking, synthetic opioids, drug treatment and prevention, and a couple of others. It's really a fascinating and challenging and interesting portfolio. I mentioned that I'm a civil servant. The main distinction, maybe you're already versed in this, but the main distinction as a civil servant is that my posting is in DC. In normal times, shall we say, I travel a lot. We all travel a lot to oversee our programs, to represent the US in multilateral meetings. For other purposes, but officers who, as you know, rotate from post to post. The other distinction is that while there's fairly high managers from the civil service within the State Department, the highest echelons within the State Department tend to be either political appointees or career foreign service. But functionally, day in, day out, the status, whether it's as a foreign service officer, civil service officer, third-party contractor, a few others, is very similar. In addition to the programs I'm talking about, we have a policy function as well. So I get to do things like, well, the anti-corruption awards that just came out a couple of weeks ago, the inaugural Anti-Corruption Champions Award, that got some wonderful reception from partners abroad, as well as our civil society, private sector partners. That was an initiative that we developed out of my office. Thank you, Professor Zucker, Boswell, and others. Which leads me to say, and without prejudice to anybody else on this panel or our moderators, that I think I have one of the best jobs you can have in this field, and certainly one of the best jobs at the State Department. So we design and develop these programs in response to US policy priorities. There's a lot of creativity. There's a pretty good amount of autonomy. We travel around to engage foreign counterparts to judge how we're doing. These are areas that there's a lot of press interest and congressional interest in, so we have a lot of engagement with external stakeholders. And almost everything we do, both in my portfolio and INL as a whole, is a collaborative effort with the rest of, as they say in the jargon, the interagency. You know, whether it's the SEC, and I'm looking at Cheryl, or DOJ, looking at Jonathan, or AID, looking at Adam. Heather was an NGO counterpart for many years. It's very collaborative and kind of a whole of government, to use another cliche, which I think also makes the work interesting. So I've also been, as we'll talk later, on the side of receiving federal funds. So it's nice to be the one who is giving the federal funds as opposed to waiting for the federal funds. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks to all of you for illustrating the breadth of opportunity in this practice area. I'd add that I'm especially pleased to co-host this webinar as an ABA co-chair of the Anti-Corruption Committee with Jessica. It gives me an opportunity to welcome colleagues with whom I've had the pleasure to work over many years. And for those listening, as Rob Leventhal just said, there's a certain collegiality and cooperation and even friendship across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, both here in the US and internationally as well. So for me, that's one of the most rewarding features of legal practice in this area. Let's move now to the many different ways to practice anti-corruption law, to the career paths that many of you have alluded to already. For it's certainly true that where you start is not necessarily where you end up. I think it's true many of us never thought we would end up where we did. Certainly when I went into private practice at Steptoe & Johnson after law school, I never thought I would end up running an NGO or teaching at law school. So I think for many, if not all of our listeners, they would be very interested to know how you moved from one sector to another. And while we only have a few minutes, if you could just share some highlights of that career path, that would be great. And I'm going to go in reverse order just to give everybody fair treatment. So Rob, why don't we start back with you again?
Sure, thank you, Nancy. Well, I think my career path, and I put the term path in quotation marks, illustrates some of the aspects you've touched on, because it both demonstrates a sort of pivot in mid-career, and also that interrelationship and the fluidity with which, at least in my career, and I've seen with many colleagues, there is a very productive and well-accepted movement from in any direction among government, the private sector, nonprofit worlds. And I think that can be very fruitful and something that folks should not be afraid of. I think of the old paradigm of someone joining IBM when they're 22 years old and staying with IBM until they retire. The world, of course, is very different now. So when I graduated from law school after clerking, I became, of all things, you might ask yourself how, I became a public defender in Brooklyn, New York, and practiced doing, felony trials to defend indigent defendants in the rough streets of Brooklyn. You look at me and you think the rough streets of Brooklyn. That was very rewarding. My career goals at that time were to have some trial advocacy, to have some direct client services, because I had enjoyed clinical programs in law school so much, and then perhaps pivot to public interest work, impact litigation, civil rights kind of work. What happened instead is that a little bit out of the blue, after being a public defender for a few years, a former colleague who was working for the UN in Central America sent back notice about an opportunity to go work on advising on criminal justice reform in Central America, in Guatemala, where there was a UN mission that was helping broker the end of the civil war there. So I sort of took a flyer, as they say, and it sounded super intriguing. I did have Spanish language skills, and even a kind of humble public defender practitioner like myself could bring some valuable insight both to legislative reform, to institutional strengthening, and then to trial capacity, trial skills in a system that was becoming more oral and adversarial in contrast to the past. It was a tremendous experience, but as Nancy knows, when I came back after a couple of years working in Guatemala, I'd been bitten by that international good governance, rule of law bug, and then gladly went to work for her at the then chapter of Transparency International for the United States. Another fantastic experience. After being there for a while, I moved to another venue, actually at the American Bar Association and its international rule of law programs. So I worked for what was then ABA CELI, the Eastern European part of what became the ABA ROLI, ABA Rule of Law Initiative. The next big change, each of those steps built on the other, but the next big change, and I'll close with this, is to say that I was working alongside of US government colleagues, and I was receiving funding from AID, Adam, which we spent well and in full compliance with all the regulations and all the reporting and procurement, and from the State Department and from other sources. And we were part of that, as to use Adam's term, implementing US government policy in foreign assistance and foreign affairs. And I thought it'd be really interesting to see what it would be like on the inside to help design the programs, to identify the needs, to formulate, at least from my small grain of sand, the policy, as opposed to being on the implementation side. So I made that change, and it's been, as I said, great. And let me leave it at that.
Terrific. That's terrific. Jonathan, you gave us a little insight into your career path before. Do you want to take just another minute on anything you think you want to share further?
Sure, Nancy. I guess I'd start by something that mentioning something that I read years ago. Justice Felix Frankfurter was often asked, like, how do I, think about my career? What should I do? And his answer was always, follow the dominant impulses of your career. In my case, things that I did even 2 jobs previously actually helped to give me a leg up into the next job that I did. Right after college, I didn't go immediately to law school. I worked for 2 years as an organized crime intelligence analyst for the Justice Department. Then I went to grad school and law school, started out at a big law firm, Cleary Gottlieb. But then I had the chance to jump to the President's Commission on Organized Crime, in part because of my interest in public service, and partly it gave me a chance to actually come up with ideas and proposals and recommendations for doing things that would allow the federal government to act more effectively against organized crime. That stemmed in part from my prior experience at the Justice Department. Because I worked on, as a lead author, the Commission's report on money laundering, making proposals for new criminal offenses, which became law in 1986. I got the chance to jump to the Treasury Department, where I headed the Treasury Department's Office on Financial Enforcement, which dealt with Bank Secrecy Act and money laundering issues. But because of the work I did at the Commission, where I was able to litigate cases in district court and courts of appeals, I knew that I really also wanted to be a litigator. That led me to a lengthy career in the fraud section, and I had a wide range of fraud and public corruption issues I got to work on there, working my way up to first chair responsibility. And from all of that, because I eventually developed a pretty broad base on lots of things that had connections between one and another. Corruption relates to money laundering relates to fraud relates to organized crime, and so on. It actually gave me a really broad platform and knowledge base that I think made me effective as Wells Fargo's anti-bribery and corruption head. So all that's to say, I don't think you could plan a rigorous path that directs you inexorably toward international anti-corruption law. Take the opportunity to do things that interest you, that really challenge you, that make you feel passionate about doing those things, and keep your ears open, look for opportunities, but keep looking for those things that you think in which you'll find intellectual and personal satisfaction. And with luck, doors open and opportunities arise, and you go on to other more interesting things in your career.
Terrific, terrific, very encouraging. Adam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, let me put a kind of a plug in for the IG community writ large. And there's 74 and growing number of IGs, and each IG has independent legal counsel. And that's by design, because sometimes legal interpretation that we have to provide our auditors or our investigators may differ from what the agency's Office of General Counsel is saying. So it's important for the IG to rely on his or her own lawyers for that advice. So that being said, I started my career in private practice. I always forget the first couple, 2 years where I was working on wills and estates at a law firm in Baltimore, but I did do a clerkship with the Department of Transportation IG during law school. And the IG community legal community is super close knit. I would say probably the most close knit when it comes to the volume and from different agencies all speaking to each other. We have monthly meetings. We call it it's a very DC term, the Council of Counsels to the Inspector General. It's CCIG. So we're very, we like to bounce ideas off each other, and often when positions open up, there's a look at, hey, do you understand the IG concept? Have you worked in an IG office, or have you clerked in an IG office during law school? So I just put a pitch out there for anyone who, you can look online, you can email me afterwards, feel free to LinkedIn me, it's fine. And I can try to point you towards, if I hear of openings in other IG offices or ours, for summer law clerks, fall law clerks, spring law clerks. I know it's a great kind of farm system into the IG, permanent IG, to becoming a permanent IG lawyer. So I started my career off, the law firm, and then I said, look, I really like that summer I spent at DOTIG. So there was an opening at the Small Business Administration Inspector General's office, where I worked for 8.5 years, and a lot of the concepts, the IG concepts, are transferable. The subject matter that the agency are overseeing is very different, of course. I mean, I was working on small business contracting fraud issues, and I left just in time before the PPP loan fraud, the PPP loan program and related fraud came about, because I would be even more busier than I am today. But going to USAID and really becoming part of this sector, and our office is part of the aid sector and the international aid and development community and conversation. And it's the relationships, I know that Rob discussed, that you have cross agencies and really worldwide. I mean, my wife said to me the other day, she said, I keep hearing your calls, your Zoom calls, and everyone has a British accent. And I said, yeah, because we're talking to FCDO, the Foreign Commonwealth Development Organization, or we're talking to partners in other IG offices of UN organizations. We're really looking into issues surrounding COVAX now, and how UN organizations and how we can coordinate and share information with other IGs. So really the path, I never thought I would be doing something related to international law and corruption and enforcement. It's just been really valuable. I'll challenge Rob. I think I have the greatest job, but we can. I think it's a good place to be as a lawyer, especially in DC. So I definitely would encourage looking into IG jobs, even if it's with an IG that an agency you haven't necessarily heard of. The experience you get working or clerking in that office can be transferable to other offices.
Great. Great. Very, very optimistic. I love that everybody loves where they are at this point. That's great. Heather, your thoughts?
Sure. Well, I also began my career in a law firm, working as an international finance attorney, actually at Clifford Chance in London, and then at Bingham McCutcheon in Boston. And that's really where I learned how the big money moves around the world, and the use of tax havens, and the stunning reach of the mammoth corporate structures of the world's multinationals. And really what I was doing was moving large amounts of money from banks and other investors to huge companies, using 200+ page loan documents that I would draft and negotiate. And although I really loved the people that I worked with, the job itself didn't spark joy. It allowed me to be working in an international setting and international sphere, which I really wanted to do, but I didn't love what I was doing. So I was looking around, and after about 6 years, I decided to take my international finance knowledge with me to a small DC nonprofit called Global Financial Integrity. And Global Financial Integrity, or GFI, is dedicated to combating the movement of illicit money around the world, and especially looking at how that money is drained out of developing countries. And I was hired as both legal counsel for the organization, so the in-house counsel role that I just described. Most people who know me from that period don't even realize I was in-house counsel, and as director of government affairs. So in my government affairs role, which is what most people know me for, I learned everything that I could about money laundering, corruption, tax evasion, and avoidance. And I worked with other NGOs, government officials, professionals, academics around the world to craft policies and regulations and laws to curtail the movement of illicit money. That meant that I'm working on all sorts of issues that touch, every single country in the world. Issues like eradicating anonymous companies and requiring banks to actually know their customers, and transparency of multinationals' global operations to clamp down on corporate tax evasion and to root out tax avoidance. I was on things like the FATF consultative body for 8 years, and I frequently attended and spoke at OECD meetings and consultations and all sorts of events and did presentations all around the world on these issues. I've been to more than 50 countries and to some of them several times. And the work was exciting, no question. And it was challenging and it was interesting. But trying to be effectively both jobs, right? Legal counsel and this very big director of government affairs job, you know, you have a lot of very serious responsibilities. And as the organization grew and the stature and the importance of the organization grew, it really was a lot to do both of those jobs. And after 9 years, I needed a change. And that's why I joined the Pew Charitable Trusts at that time, which I've talked about previously. So that's basically my my approach. I will say before I went to law school, I also worked at the European Parliament for about 3.5 years, which was an amazing experience. And it's really great, as Rob was saying, to get that experience in corporate or NGO and in government, and you know, at law firms if you want. It really rounds you as a person and lets you see things, issues from all different perspectives. And it's important to be able to do that in order to make really smart decisions and think through how things are going to affect all different stakeholders.
Terrific. That's great. Cheryl, some thoughts on your career path?
Sure. So like most everyone else, I didn't really have a clear plan. When I went to law school, I knew I wanted to be a litigator. That seemed to make sense, but the rest of it really just sort of came as I went along. I didn't even take a securities regulation class. So, you know, a mystery as to how I ended up in the enforcement division at the Securities and Exchange Commission, but I did. So I started at a law firm, worked there for a few years. And the work I liked the most there was the work that related to putting the pieces of a puzzle together, working on white collar criminal defense type matters. And it occurred to me that I really wanted to develop that skill. And that's why I left and went to become a staff attorney at the SEC. And really the work of a staff attorney is to do whatever case comes before you. So it was everything. Insider trading, accounting fraud, market manipulation, you name it. And that's what I did, even up the ranks as a supervisor. But toward, I guess, like I mentioned before, somewhere around 2006 or so, the team working with me got some FCPA related matters that we had the opportunity to work on. No one was really all that interested back then at the SEC. In fact, I think it was even earlier than that. It was in the 90s that this happened, late 90s. And it really wasn't anything anyone else wanted, but my group was really eager to give it a go. And so we took on a large number of them, ended up doing the whole series of oil for food matters, the Siemens matter, and a number of others, and found it fascinating. It was a good fit for me in terms of what I like. Again, the complexities of the facts, putting all of that together, dealing with issues relating to, you know, other countries and figuring out transactions and following money. All of that just appealed to me, and also working in an area that was growing and that needed coordination in terms of thinking through how to work with the Department of Justice and other regulators. So, you know, my background, as I mentioned, did not include anything related to the FCPA. And I don't think it needs to. My advice, I guess, to anyone who thought they might be interested in this is a lot of what I do. It's really just being a good investigator, you know, being a well-rounded lawyer, obviously, but also being someone who doesn't mind, you know, digging into lots of facts, putting those pieces together, lots of, you know, managing of policy issues that come up, novel legal issues. I spend a ton of time on the road. I think naturally a good fit for me. I'm an Army brat. I lived on Army bases till I was 18 and lived overseas for a significant number of years. So I think all of that kind of made sense in a way, although there was no real grand plan. There are tons of opportunities at the SEC. It's a great place to get the skill set I think you would need to do the kind of work I do. And you could also even join a firm and do this work. Again, it's document intensive. It's, there's lots of review of emails, interviewing of people, pulling facts together, dealing with regulators and companies and various cultures. I find it fascinating and challenging, but it's certainly an area that I would highly recommend.
Thank you. I think you've all made clear that there's something about this topic, whether you're, no matter which area you're practicing in, that does grab you and that does bring out, I think, a certain passion for what you're doing, feeling you're having an impact in many, many different ways. I just want to make sure we have time, though, to turn to a question that I think our law students and junior attorneys have, and we already had a question earlier in the discussion about this, which is how do you get started as a student? And for the junior attorneys or those in practice who want to change or shift their focus, how to enhance the skill sets into this particular area. So you've all touched a little bit, I think, on this already, but let's go around one more time before we open the floor to our listeners for their questions. What advice do you give those starting or rising in the field? Courses, internships, affiliations. We've mentioned the ABA, certainly the internships at the SEC, USAID that you've mentioned. I'm biased. I think our course at the AU Law School for practitioners and students is very useful for those entering or moving through the job market. But what's your view? Let's go reverse order again. Cheryl, we'll start with you.
Sure. And I think I've mentioned some of it before. I definitely think that taking advantage of internships makes a lot of sense. There are a wealth of opportunities, especially if you're in the DC area, New York as well, not just DC, but just take advantage of those. It's a great way to figure out if you like something, figure out if it's a good fit for you, to make connections, and to be able to put that on your resume to help you in that next move. Government agencies have paid internships and unpaid ones, obviously. So think about both. Many schools have programs where you can get credit to do internships. I know at the SEC, for example, we had people who came and were interns during the school year and got credit for that. So another option that I would recommend. I think the skill set, like I mentioned before, for what I do, it's really something you develop over time as a lawyer at either a law firm or the government. Again, it really, I think, is important to be the kind of person who likes that kind of work, particularly coming in as a mid-level associate. If you've got that experience, having dealt with larger investigations and managing them, you're going to be a good fit. We've brought in people who didn't do FCPA investigations, but came from some other area, and so you don't necessarily have to have expertise in it specifically, although it can be helpful. So I'll stop. I know we don't have a ton of time, but I really would put in a plug for government agencies and getting that experience during the summers and the school year.
Yeah, good advice. Heather, a few thoughts as we whiz through this topic?
Sure. I think everybody working in this area, not everybody, but many people working in this area, and when they start out, they think, I really want to make a difference. I want to work in government. I want to work on policy. And they think, if I work at a bank, I'm a total sellout, right? That's not what I want to be doing with my life. Well, yeah, might not be what you want to be doing with your life, but it is a fantastic way to learn about, all of the money laundering compliance, all of their corruption compliance, what banks have to do. You spend a couple of years working in-house at a bank, right off, you can learn your investigation skills. You heard almost everybody on this call really highlight the investigation skills that they have and have had to develop over the years. If you get to be fairly senior in the anti-corruption world, almost every job is going to require that you have an investigations background of some sort. And if you get to be too senior without having developed that, you can't really, it's really difficult to say, oh, I'll learn that on the job. People are not willing to accept that. So think about, where can I go where I can learn the basics of what I need to know to be successful here? Not necessarily what type of business am I going to, because you're early in your career, you're going to go someplace for a couple of years and you're going to move on, right? So figure out where can you get the skills that you're going to need to take with you to get to the next levels where you want to be. And that's what I would really focus on.
Good advice. Adam, thoughts?
I'll keep it very brief. Internships and connections and forums like this, it's just the best way just to meet people, get your foot in the door, especially with federal government. I know a lot of you, who are in attendance, virtual attendance, you go to USAID.jobs.gov and you're like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to do it? But the best way to really get your resume into the hands of the right people, and legal jobs, a lot of them are accepted service. So, meaning some of the more laborious processes that are involved sometimes don't apply, sometimes still apply. So just really connections and internships and prior experience.
Excellent. Jonathan, thoughts?
A couple of things I would say briefly are, and partly from my Wells Fargo experience, in general, I think large corporate enterprises are more likely to be interested in bringing on lawyers after they've had a little bit of experience in some other area. I mean, it's rare, I think, for people to be taken into an in-house compliance or in-house legal role at a major corporation straight out of law school or straight out of a clerkship. On the other hand, if you have even a little bit of experience with litigation, civil or criminal, having some kind of litigation background where you could actually have legitimate opinions about how things work in the real world, in courtrooms, that can serve you very well if you want to move into an in-house role at a company or nonprofit of one sort or another. And I guess the last thing I'd say is, partly from my experience, though I did not, as I was working my way up as a younger lawyer through the ranks of the ABA, I did take the opportunity with other sections of the ABA to do specific work, specific projects. Part of the way in which you gain credibility is by being willing to work with people who are the chairs or co-chairs of major committees and doing some of the scut work, the difficult, demanding kinds of things that committees need to do if they're going to develop proposals for legislative change or other kinds of guidance. And that really can make a difference in how well you are perceived by more senior people, and therefore how much more likely they are to want to take you under their wing and support you and move you in the right direction. So, it's not just a matter of joining committees, though the Anti-Corruption Committee is a great place to join if you have an interest in anti-corruption work. It is also about, as you would in any other area of your practice, showing that you're interested and committed and doing your best work, because it's not about glad handing, it's about having other people who can help you in your profession recognize that you really have something to offer and you do good work when it's needed to be done. And you kind of earn your stripes as a way of getting to the point where they say, sure, I'd be happy to help you with this, or I can open a door, or doing whatever is necessary.
Yeah, I think that's sound advice. And I would add for those who are have asked questions about mid-career getting into anti-corruption law, or those who are working overseas, who are not an American, who want to enter practice here. This is a wide open field, and the course we offer in June at the AU Law School features people like you're hearing from today, people who are practitioners, who bring that expertise to the table to talk with you, who can share substantive knowledge, but to the point that many of our speakers have made, you will be networking with people who are in all these various aspects of the anti-corruption and legal practice. So you'll get to hear the very pragmatic view, and in only a week or two of classes, you will get some good contacts and some great knowledge. So I think it's worth saying keep your skills up. Rob, closing thoughts on career path. I have been honored to have had some connection with Rob as that career path unfolded, and I can't tell you what a great pleasure it was for me as well.
So to take us home in 60 seconds, perhaps, picking up a theme from Adam, shamelessly network, because usually people on the other end of that conversation are really happy to help and really happy to share their experience and to make connections. So don't be afraid to do that. I wish I had known that 80 years ago when I was getting started. It's also super useful for due diligence when you're actually considering applying for a job, because you can find out, oh, there's an inside candidate, or oh, it's a great place to work, but they're reorganizing. They may not exist in 6 months or something else. So use your network for due diligence when you're applying. Number 2, we talked about internships, but Presidential Management Fellow is a great pathway from a degree like a master's or a JD into government. It's 2 years of federal service with a guaranteed conversion at the end. So take a look at the PMF program. Number 3, I have to say this, look at me, consider the policy side. So use your legal education and skills and experience, and maybe not practice as a lawyer, but take those into international law reform, public international law, what have you, on the policy side. If you're thinking about that experience in advocacy and negotiation, particularly multi-stakeholder negotiation, in kind of the mechanisms of policymaking, whether it's US government or international organizations, are all super helpful. Over and out.
Thank you to everybody. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Jessica. I was going to turn it back to you.
Oh, thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and try to address some of these questions. The only thing I would add to this, the networking is the big part of it. One of the things I tell my students all the time, work really, really, really hard for the people early on in your career, because those are going to be the people that are going to reach behind when opportunities open up, to think of you, so that you don't necessarily have to feel sometimes like you're in a sea of resumes. And USA jobs, those are the people that are going to give you a heads up that a job is open, or they'll think of you when somebody says, hey, do you know of any junior attorneys or mid-level attorneys that could fill something? Those are the people that are going to think of you. And the goal eventually is hopefully that you work hard enough for people that you're not actively applying for jobs, that people are coming to you with those opportunities, because one opportunity builds on the next. So all I can say is work incredibly hard and treat every internship or job opportunity like it's an ongoing interview for your next job. So that's one piece of advice. And the other thing I would just encourage you to think about doing is writing a lot. So wherever you have classes that you have seminar papers or your journal note, and I strongly encourage you, I'm also a senior editor of the FCPA blog. We accept blog posts from law students and junior attorneys, as long as it complies with the style guide. Think about the relevant blog publications and really do consider writing, because that's things you can add to your resume to add to your expertise. And my last piece is, if you don't speak a foreign language, get yourself some Rosetta Stone. You truly, language skills, the students that I have that have language skills tend to get snapped up the most quickly because of this area. So let me turn to some questions. We did get a question about mid-career transitions into anti-corruption law. I do think that actually kind of falls under some of the advice we've already given, which is to work pretty hard and get to know people and network and attend events and really, again, try to build your expertise in this area. But I want to get to one question that my colleague, Professor Chris Eukins, asked about security issues, because that is a concern. And I don't think sometimes students think about the potential security issues when they do international anti-corruption work. And I don't know if any of our panelists have the ability or have the interest in addressing that issue. How do you deal with security issues when doing investigations abroad? So I don't know if a particular panelist wants to jump in on that one. I see.
I'm happy to talk about, not necessarily with respect to investigations, because that's not what I worked on, but just operating internationally, right? One of the things that I've written down is that, I would always think through before going to a country, How am I going to handle if my car is pulled over by the police or by the military and they're demanding some sort of bribe, right? How am I going to handle if at the airport I'm pulled aside and told my actually valid visa or my actually valid yellow card is not valid, and there's clearly an expectation that I'm going to give them some sort of payment to make it go away, right? You need to think those things through in advance and be prepared to deal with them when they happen. It's bad to be feeling like you have to give some sort of bribe. In any situation, it's incredibly bad when you work in anti-corruption, right? And those are things that people don't realize that they will in fact face as they travel around the world. If you're not working for a government, you don't have the government backing to be able to say, I'm a government official, step back. You need to figure out how you're going to handle those things. You need to vet the parties and partners that you're working with. You need to make sure you're not working with folks that are on a sanctions list or related to people on a sanctions list. You need to make sure they have a good history of working in the area that they've been working in, because if they're new, there are risks that they could be a front for a money laundering or other type of organization. There are a lot of different things that you do need to be looking at and thinking about when you're working internationally in this area.
And I would just add, from a security point of view, just thinking of it from a safety point of view, it's something that comes up a lot in terms of travel to certain countries. And so we tend to take precautions. There's some countries we don't go to, depending on what guidance we're getting from state and others. And then we'll, I typically come up with workarounds. Another country where people will travel to that we feel is a safer place for us to conduct our interviews, for example. So we're always paying close attention to that. Our travel office is very focused on that as well, and we pay attention to the alerts that we're getting relating to what's going on in a particular jurisdiction at any given time. And so some of the, believe it or not, lots of times corruption isn't happening in Paris. It's happening in places that are a little bit, that can be a bit more challenging. And so lots of the travel is not glamorous, and some of it can be a bit tricky. So we're very careful about paying attention to that, and definitely taking the precautions we need to, and not going to some places if we just don't think it's safe.
All right. Well, thank you to everybody for that. I think we're literally at the hour, and we did promise our attendees we would wrap it up within the hour. We did get a few questions we weren't able to get to. I point out now, at the outset of the program, I put some links to some information about the American Bar Association, especially the International Anti-Corruption Committee. Again, I encourage you to join that committee if you are interested in this work. We do a lot of monthly programming. It's a great opportunity to learn about our work and to network with individuals in this practice area. So again, I encourage you to check that out. We also did get, in the last minute, we got an offer from Teresa Forbes of Treasury, who says she has great opportunities in legal positions and policy work related to anti-money laundering. So for those of you interested in work with respect to Treasury Department, this is all you. So I want to thank my co-moderator, Nancy. I want to thank our esteemed group of panelists for your time and your contributions today. And I want to thank our attendees today for joining us. We really appreciate it. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, and take care. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you all.